All right, gentlemen, and we are live. So I'll quick down. We'll move on the Mahler White debate, and it was not quite what I was expecting. And frankly, uh, nearly a waste of time. Awfully strong way to put it, but I think the biggest blunder in the whole thing, frankly, was Mahler, and I think very much it was a tactical error on his point, or excuse me, on his side, because he did not come in. I feel like he built a strong basis. It was very total evidence, which has its place, but there was no what he was arguing. It didn't seem like. Now I know, having listened to other debates with him, with Samuel briefly at the very, very, very end. I think it was the final segment of the formal debate where he mentioned the curse of Ham, and a big foundation part of his argument. He didn't go into that at all. So, from my perspective, some pragmatic issues and some worthwhile issues that he brings up. From an optics standpoint, I think White probably walked away with this one. Us off on what your thoughts of the debate were.
I was actually expecting more of the cringe to come from White, but I was surprised. I mean, that's not to say White didn't make mistakes, but the Corey just was not even there. I think where I want to, first of all, his opening statement had nothing to actually do about anything. That was just shocking. I was like, wow, you're right. He did mention the curse of Ham. I was expecting that. But he didn't even mention anything in the opening statement about the actual proposition he was making. But I think the real problem here, and this is where, so what would want to frame this as is Corey is damaging the faith because he's saying something about justification. But I think what's really damaging here is what Corey is saying is that there are certain things God cannot do, which, okay, first of all, yeah, there are. He can't lie. He can't make a stone so big he can't move it. Fine. One is a logical contradiction, and one is a contradiction, so that'll be making a stone so big he can't move it. And another would be a contradiction of his nature, i.e., God's nature is not to lie. But the entire case Corey made was that, and again, this is not a clearly defined proposition, so I'm only sort of guessing as to part of this. He says that God cannot sanctify an average black man equally to an average white man. That does not fall into the category of a logical impossibility, nor does it fall into the category of violating God's nature. So whatever that is, it isn't like any of those two. And yet that is the entirety of Corey's argument that, well, actually, this is one of those two things. Either it violates his nature or it violates God's, some law of logic. And then second of all, the idea about like feminism and transgenderism is immaterial because White's position or a more like boomer con Christian position isn't that black people can become white people or white people can become black people, but that, God's spirit is strong enough to overcome even the hardest heart. I mean, it's funny, Paul didn't really come up very much in this context because he's apropos. He was killing other Christians when God struck him down on the road to Damascus. And so I think this is really dangerous. You don't want, when you say God can't do something, and we all admit that there are certain things he can't do, we need to be very clear and specific what we mean by that. And that usually means one of two things. It violates God's nature. And so we read in James that God cannot lie. So right there, he self-disclosed. Or it violates some law of logic, in which case God can't do that either. This is neither of those. So this, I think, is really just kind of, it's dangerous because it's imprecise. Is it carelessness? Is it something else? It feels careless because he never said, because what he would have to say is this: God sanctifying the average man equally to the average white man is either a violation of his nature or a violation of the laws of logic or something, or transmutation, like say turning a woman into a man or man into an animal. But I'm not even sure transmutation is impossible for God within limits, because Moses had the stick turn into a snake. And so that's transmutation. You go from dead wood to a living snake. So even some changes at the level of biology and even nature can occur with the power of God. So this to me just seems to be very dangerous, because we don't want to go around saying God can't do things unless we have a very good reason to think so.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, similarly, not as strong as your case, but similarly, we've had an ass talk. To some degree, that devised the at least the laws of normativity, if not the laws of logic. And he continued to argue from logic if it was simple and plain. And I think that was even one of the going to build words there in his initial argument. I'm sorry, him and Mahler. And I didn't point did I hear a clear foundation come through as to why they defied.
Yeah.
It really was. I've heard him and other expecting a lot more tonight. I'm not sure what this was. Simply he man, he made it to the big tent. And
It could be. The other thing, okay, so now I want to go to James White, because there's actually an important point James, I believe, is trying to make, but it wasn't, Corey didn't pick up on it. So when you have this sort of perspective of a race realist Christian saying, okay, Europeans who have historically been Christian for 1700 years ish have, are do not struggle with the same sort of obvious carnal moral sins that blacks do in the United States, murder, rape, and or even in Africa, like the stuff we see there. And here's the point, though, because he's saying, well, look, prior to Christianity, the Gentiles were pagan, and then even within the Roman Empire, you had those outside that were pagan. And so if you look at a better example would be the Irish tribes. They practiced human sacrifice. Now, Crom Cruach was a demon that they sacrificed children to. And that's definitely more along the lines of sub-Saharan African behavior. And yet Christianity transformed the Irish. So the question is, there is a temporality to this question. If you were living in the 3rd century or 4th century AD, yeah, the Irish should be barbarians sacrificing children to Crom Cruach, and yet the Spirit of God transformed them. So to what extent is this a fixed, rigid factor? Because obviously, over the 1700 years, the Irish have changed greatly. And so Corey never really dealt with that, because what's the actual principle on which the heart is rooted? It's the soul, it's the will, it's the spirituality. Now, of course, all of those can be affected to some degree by biology. But if you look at the Irish and how they changed, the question then becomes, okay, how would that? What if we had a Black Patrick go to the Congo or something, right, and then do the same thing? Could he not do that? Maybe, maybe not. But that's not what Corey has to establish that. And I don't think he did.
Yeah, well, and that was another. When he was arguing, he assumed that we were understanding what was implicit. Frankly, I couldn't even put together what was necessarily an argument. And I think the temporal issue seemed there for a minute he was going to establish that this is a pre. He beat around the bush to some degree, saying that we can all be sanctified. Well, then he needed. Well, it should have been in the resolution, but then secondly, he should have been able to present that point that I'm talking about this life at this place. They're incapable, and the only way in which he did that, crime statistics matter. They obviously impact how we're going to interact with particular communities, but at no point did I didn't think, make on the actual sanctification. And like talked about now for the past 3 minutes, time or portion of sanctification. Tex, how are you doing? You on, bud?
Yeah, doing good, man. Sorry. Had some phone problems. Out now.
Okay. No worries. Hey, so perspective, or actually, let me walk that back. Todd and I, we've been the past 10 minutes beating up on Mahler. What was of the debate in general? And then are there some loose presuppositions or particular understanding of, since Mahler claims Lutheranism?
The only thing I can think of is that Mahler is probably thinking about baptism happening as a child, his sanctifying work on you from that age. Hello? Am I back?
Yeah, we can hear you. I think we lost Wandering Panda.
No, I think we're all good. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I just want to make sure. So yes, I believe that could be what's going on there. Maybe White doesn't expect well. I don't really know what White expects, but perhaps he doesn't expect the Holy Spirit to be working from infancy.
Sure, but that shouldn't necessarily affect the argument black sanctification versus white sanctification. I'm just make sure that the Lutheran distinctives that Todd and I are missing out on here that tend to what Mahler was. We both walked away saying this was not really convincing of anything. So I don't know if Lutheran in there.
Yeah, no. Not that I really not that I could identify. Let me put it that way. I kind of lean towards I guess White on this question to a degree. But ultimately I don't really know what Mahler was arguing.
Yeah, neither did any of us. The other thing, this was really, I think, frankly disturbing. At the end in his closing statement, now Corey said sanctification does not create a new creation. Those in Christ are a new creation. That is the exact wording of the New Testament. Now, if he wants to mean something else by new creation, he needs to say something else because that's the standard received biblical usage. And now, I don't believe Corey's saying actually that we're not new creations in Christ. But that's a very dangerous way to say that because that creates a lot of unnecessary confusion. And that word, those two words, already have a meaning which he's clearly not referring to. And I thought that was really disappointing.
Yeah. This, boy, I don't want to come out with too strong a hammer, but I think Corey's jumped the shark moment.
Maybe it was pretty bad.
This was not. I mean, this was not good. He has built up, and that's one of the only things I could think is that clued into other things he's already argued. But that's absurdity. You don't go into a debate, and so if this is the debate that comes off looking like a kook because we're all sitting here saying, and what was the basis for that argument? Yep. Okay. So if we're going to go down this road of, Mahler just, it was knowing we're not even declaring who won because we're all kind of what just happened.
I mean, I think White had it correct with this first rebuttal. He said the debate's already over. I don't know what I'm even talking to.
Yeah. I was willing to give Mahler the grace for stronger in the second and had what coherent, well, he was more coherent than the first portion, but I don't think he ever came a decent foundation to his argument. He
I'm
wraps.
not even sure what it was.
Yeah, and that's fair, because I was going to say he wraps up his second portion running into crime statistics. Well, we're all aware of the crime statistics, and there's so many paths that we can go down on that route. Go in, is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it that was okay? So here's sort of a sorry, what was that?
The crime statistics. It's to me, it's not a good argument on sanctification because, well, I mean,
right. Well, and here's a nasty way to. I could almost believe that, but I could almost believe that Mahler is a bad actor, came into this in bad faith to bring up the black population in the U.S. You could almost get me to, because how foundationless it appeared throughout the debate. Recognize, but boy, this was not good. And to me, it almost seemed as if he wanted to talk out of both sides of his mouth, HBD, but then he also wanted to make some sort of biblical case for it. The positions are mutually exclusive. But what I'm saying is, I didn't find a good foundation for either, and it felt like he was just choosing arguments midway through both positions. You guys have any thoughts?
Well, as someone who spent a lot of time both reading and engaging with Kenneth, I knew what the arguments should have been, and I just didn't see any of them. And I'm like, wow, okay. If anybody remembers Faith and Heritage, I read a lot of their articles and interacted with a few of those guys. And it's like, I know what the position would be, and a lot of it's rooted in Old Testament exegesis. And I just didn't see any of that. And I'm like, well, most people aren't going to know that. That's just a given. So if you're going into this, you're going to have to assume most people don't know this. And the other thing too is, okay, let's say 80 to 85% of Black people say they're Christian. That doesn't make it so. I mean, especially if they're committing the crimes that the statistics say they are.
Yeah, and White
strong
called him on that.
Strong indication that they're not, right? So, I mean, that's
exactly.
that's not strong.
Yeah, and I mean, another argument is, okay, so 60% are Christian, people profess after.
Yeah. So boy, I'm stumbling over my words because there was not a whole lot of meat here, and I'm about to say, do we just want to wash this away?
A few more things you want.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, there's a few more things.
Yeah, go for it.
So let's when I say that I think White won, that doesn't mean I think White did amazing or that White didn't make mistakes. It's just that White was coherent, right? So the other guy wasn't entirely coherent. Now, there is one thing that I think Corey did make a good point on, White really kind of got iffy with, right? He said, when he asked White this twice in Romans, where Paul says he wishes he was accursed for his kinsman of the flesh. And he says, was Paul wrong in not having that same opinion about the Gentiles? And then White says, well, Paul, he was the mission, he was the apostle to the Gentiles as chosen by God. Now, and then Corey says, okay, well, But was that Paul's doing or God's? Well, first of all, Lutherans and Reform believe in predestination, so technically Paul isn't making the choice at all, because the idea is, especially for White, because White believes in meticulous determination by eternal decree. So even what Paul chooses to do, quote unquote, in the flesh, isn't really what he chooses to do. It's what God eternally decreed. So they're actually the same choice. But what White doesn't want to say is that Paul has a higher order preference for his fellow Jews. Meanwhile, he's still the apostle to the Gentiles. And White didn't really want to answer that. And I think that was probably the best thing Corey did. He did say, well, look, I mean, this is what Paul said. What would they say about this, White? And White didn't really want to go there. The other thing, too, that I'm shocked when segregation came up is they didn't mention Acts 6. Now, the segregation in Acts 6 is cultural. Hebrews versus the Hellenists, and those are the Greek-speaking Jews. But the apostles basically segregate the congregation based on culture in order to reduce infighting. So you could theoretically extrapolate on a prudential level that could work. I'm not saying that would be a uniform practice, but on a prudential level, you might do that. Corey didn't bring that up, so I'm surprised. But again, White didn't really want to engage with Paul, saying that he wishes he was cursed. And Paul is saying that
right
in part because most of that. Go ahead.
Well, and White could get away with it. What did that have to, and that was the frustrating thing, is that Corey's bringing up arguments that in isolation work. And frankly, White hit on a tear this year on how centrism is, any form of kinism, but this whole woke right thing, and we even heard it in White is running to the Michael Jones argument of I stand with Christians. I hear you on that, but you're taking to doggone it, 5'8". First, I know you know what I'm talking about. But anyone who doesn't care for his family, I'm having a brain fart right now.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, first thing fine.
Regardless, yeah. So we know the arguments. We know the post-war consensus, and in isolation was making arguments that can understand. But we'll engage with them, because what does this have to do with sanctification? And so that was an issue. Oh, and then from my perspective, I think White's strongest moment was when he said, Corey, what is this doing but bringing division? And yes, we want to separate the wheat from the chaff, and we want to dig. But if we don't step back and consider that argument of what is this bringing besides division, the amount of the errors that can be achieved in ignoring that is absolutely what happened. That's not the whole range of frustration. Absolutely, it was a tactical issue. It's easy enough for White's post-war consensus to just say, well, what are you doing besides bringing division? For the sole fact that Mahler have a foundation that built a solid position. Sorry, I'm going from A to B to C, but this it pissed me off.
Well, the other thing too is, the bar was set too high, right? In order to prove the importance of ethnic identity, you don't need to also prove that it's harder for God to sanctify these people. Well, why would that be the terms of the debate?
Amen.
Why? I mean, and then second of all, I don't really see what that has to do with anything, right? I mean, let's okay. I'm gonna use an outlier here, right? General Buttnaked, right? He was cannibal, witch doctor, warlord, everything under the sun he did, right? And then He claims to have had, an experience with Jesus and then a missionary. And now he's Joshua Milton Blah. He was a part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's like God's power is shown in the difficulty of the individual he's sanctifying. That's the thing, right? That's the entire point. That's Paul. He's killing Christians on the road to Damascus. So technically, those are the people that are probably more likely for God to target because it shows his power more.
And it is an interesting observation there that it's only and particularly argued from the out and 5 minutes into offering generalities. And then that generality, sorry, being a dead horse. So I'm not going to say it again, but there's a word that starts with.
Well, there's another thing too, right? We know God works from outliers because throughout the Old Testament, he chooses the younger son. Because in ancient times, you choose the eldest son to inherit and do things. But he tends to choose the younger son, right? David was the least of his brothers. Eliab was tall and handsome, and he wasn't chosen king, right? Or the least of the tribes, like Saul. Saul was least of the tribes of Israel, Benjamin. Least of the tribes, right? That's God's MO. I mean, we're not just talking about, that's literally his MO. I don't know why we're supposed to not talk about this.
Yeah. Hey, for Whitaker. So we jumped in. We did not follow any of the Q&A, interesting Q&A. Go ahead and fill us in, guys, on that. We didn't stick around for any of that. We heard the debate and said we were just going to call it in after the formal debate itself had ended.
Yeah. But we haven't heard a lot from you, Tex. Do you have anything you want to add to the observations on this debate?
I think we killed him.
I guess we did, but no, I'm very. Let's see what I'm very familiar with the Kennist arguments. And in fact, my video on race was positively reviewed by Kennist, even though I wouldn't call myself one. And this was just awful. This was really, really, really bad. And the thing that was sad too is with White. He's running scared because see when you talk to someone like White, what you don't want to do on a hot button issue like that is come at it from the most extreme indefensible position. What you want to do is you want to talk to White because of his age, his class. He's got the boomer truth regime. You want to talk to White in the most normie friendly way possible, right? And I actually had a Kennist tell me once privately about my video that I was probably the most normie-friendly version of that he'd ever seen, talking about these issues of race from the Bible. And so I just don't know what the guy was trying to do.
Yeah, that's so bummer. What it just fizzled out, man. I feel like a.
Let's see. I think there's a few other things that I have here. Again, the time dimension is really important. Wait.
No, go ahead.
No, we're waiting for you. Go ahead.
I was just saying, not every debate can be the one that wins it all.
No,
yeah, that's fair. See Mahler falling like a lead balloon.
Oh, the other thing Mahler said.
I watched.
The other thing was so bad is he knows better, right? So he was just being sloppy. He said, at the time of the New Testament, Paul was talking to Jewish pagans. No, Jews by definition are not pagans. What?
Well, so I'll give him a little bit. I'll give him a little bit of leeway on this, and I am reading way into this, so I could be incorrect. One of the arguments, especially in higher church areas, and Todd, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but that yes, it wasn't Talmudic Judaism, but Judaism, Sanhedric Judaism, had already started deviating from the Torah and from uh, Testament Judaism. And so, while Jesus did fulfill Judaism, the reason he was denied moved away from that form. It's a technical debate, and frankly, I might be giving much leeway on that.
Also, 1 Titus 12 and 13.
Hmm.
That was good. I was expecting him to bring that up. Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. And Paul is giving an extra level of admonition to Titus, saying, hey, your job's going to be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, it's easy enough, though, for White to clap back on saying that the Scythians and the barbarians, and to say, here's how these people were being understood there. And because no decent argument was made on the similarity, and it was only, oh, my lands, it was into the debate. Maybe it was 3/4 of the way into the debate, after he had already sort of dropped the shoe, which, again, we knew what he was saying. Yes, Augustine isn't your typical only 10 minutes later that he clarified, well, Augustine wasn't sub-Saharan. It was not good. It was not good. And because no foundation had been built on the particularity of sub-Saharan Africans and mom to them and why they couldn't be sanctified, and even admitting, well, there needed to be definition of terms. It's easy enough when he's messing with Lutherans, I imagine, were so these are people that are somewhat familiar with these terms in general, even the lay population. But this debate was just, you know what? Let's go back 10 minutes. I take it back. I think it's a clear win, because we have to keep making leeway, and we have to Mahler statements. And I think what we're reading, but that's the issue, is that I can kind of get there. I can assume what it is I think he was saying, because we've heard other cogency outside of this debate. But on the debate level, this was just plain awful. And White can walk away like a super calm granddad.
Yeah.
Let's just love everybody. God wants us to love Christians. What the? This was stupid.
Well, I think, again, there's many things we can say that were bad about this debate. But I think the worst part of this debate was when you say that God cannot do something, you have to have very good reasons for saying that. And one reason is it would contradict his nature. God cannot lie, because we are told God cannot lie based on his nature. Also, God cannot do what's logically impossible, because it's logically impossible. Okay. To say that God cannot sanctify the average black man to the average white man is not logically impossible. That's where I think he was trying to go, but he never established that fact. And then, second of all,
I mean, to be fair, also sanctification can't be quantified. It's not like there's a little meter on your forehead that says you are 25% sanctified, you are 75% sanctified,
yes.
whatever. That's not something that you can just quantify and know as if you can, measure water.
That's fair. I would push back a little bit on that, in that I would agree that we can't know. I think one of the arguments that Mahler could have made was this idea of, so the idea of judgment, to me, argues that there is at least sanctification, at the very least, moral portion of life into eternity. And that's a convoluted way of saying measured in this life, then there are of sanctification. And this does get into one of those fuzzy areas of the Bible in that Christ is salvation. How much love for Christ post death is something that only God can know. And so it's this weird argument that I'm not trying to say that God grades on a curve, because again, Christ, but there is this recognition too that we are different people on different parts. And so if theosis is the goal, God is the goal, that doesn't necessarily mean that we all get judged at the same point with the same abilities. At no point did Mahler argue anything to that. What he was arguing is that look at the rape statistics, look at the crime statistics. We're talking about conceptually, and I think Todd's really making a good case here that what he was arguing for wasn't a route, that this is a logical ability, which it's not. Because he even, well, I don't want to argue about Clarence Thomas. I don't want to argue from the outlier. And again, I think Todd made a good point earlier that to some degree that is Christianity. Is
Well, the other thing too. Okay, I want to bring up something that I had written. For those who remember Matt Parrott, at one point back in 2016, I was having
oh, don't do this to me, Todd.
No. I was having some back and forth with Matt Parrott, and he was also taking this, more hard ethno-nationalist line. And he was Orthodox, at least then. I don't know what he is now. And I was like saying, I had this whole essay written up where I'm like, Parrott, like Orthodox tradition is absolutely not ethno-nationalist in the way that you want. And I went through all sorts of Orthodox history. And then back in the day, Bulbasaur actually read it and said, yeah, that's a good refutation of Matt Parrott. I'm like, wow, there you go. And so this reinforces what White said, right? White said, I'm taking the classic Christian perspective. And, okay, we need to define what we mean by classic Christian perspective. But if you go back to the Roman times, medieval times, which is what I did with Matt Parrott, you're not going to find segregationist attitudes. You're just not. They didn't exist at that time. So in this small regard, White was correct. And for the first 1,500 years, you don't have segregationist attitudes. That only develops in Africa and in the New World, and that's due to the Indians in the New World, and then the blacks already in Africa, and then the slaves that come over. And so that's just the historical facts. You can't pretend that goes back to the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, medieval Catholic Europe. It just doesn't.
How would you for? I kind of want to jump into the nationalism. Let's hold off on a minute. Just scratch what I just said. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, all I'm saying is that this is a similar kind of argument that I actually had with Matt Parrott. And we've all heard about Philotism. I brought that up too. But these are not Orthodox, so that's not directly relevant to them. But probably the best thing Corey could have pointed to was Acts 6 and the cultural segregation of the Hebrews and the Hellenists. He didn't go there. That might have allowed for a pastoral or prudential point on this. And then he's probably going to point to the Old Testament with the Hebrews. But, of course, they're a unique case, though, because they had to exterminate all the Canaanites that were there before them. and that there just wasn't, because of that, any issue with living to large alien populations, like you would have had a New World or Sub-Saharan Africa due to the age of colonization. So
Yeah, this does go back to a lot of the 2016 and 2017 dates when people are. It was as if Tower of Babel, ethnos, which went into that, but ethnos and the Tower and understanding of what nation meant in Scripture, all of a sudden in 2016, 17, and not and a lot of the more novel translations, but these words in Scripture were all of a sudden being looked, and none of that was built on. Man, I'm trying to it come off as if it's on another planet, man. To parse what he was saying and to have any sort of grace or coherency in there, such a background. It was just it was bad.
yeah, it was just bad. But like I said, the biggest part was saying God can't do that's, I think, the most dangerous. That's not just bad, that's dangerous, because we got to be very careful.
Yeah, I think that's
Can't do something.
Yeah, I would agree.
very solid. Yeah, so jump in, bud. We haven't heard from you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really a thought that I haven't had that hasn't been said. It's honestly, to a large degree, this kind of seemed like a pointless debate, pointless argument, just generally not helpful for anybody at all.
I think,
Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows?
Yeah, I expected far more. I expected Folly. I expected White to act like an ass, because from my perspective, he's done that before. I am not a huge White fan. I said on my stream last week, I was talking with. I'm grateful for the work White has done. King James Version onlyism. I think that was a stellar, accessible book, especially for the layperson, when it comes to saying, look, you don't have to only be dealing with King James. Now, I prefer King James for the most part nowadays, but yeah, you absolutely do only be dealing with that. And so I'm for White for that. But other than that, I've generally found him to be an ass. But tonight, I thought he walked away with it, and he can.
you'll hear about it tomorrow. You'll hear
He
about
will.
it tomorrow.
I was going to say, deservedly gloat on X tomorrow, and it will be deserved. It not good,
The last
but
thing
I guess
the last thing I have to
go
say
for
was, it was so ridiculous how Corey just grandstanded on the cross examination, asking a series of pointless questions. Like that was just like, even the moderators were like,
Yeah, that. Yeah, that felt like watching
if
someone.
he.
I mean, it's my understanding he's a lawyer,
That was my understanding as well. Yes.
so it kind of felt like him. So yeah,
So
it's
the
kind of
first
felt
time
like
he
him.
did it,
I mean, yeah, you're right. Grandstanding.
yeah, the first time he did it, I was willing. He's acting as a lawyer, but as he went further into it, and then especially the second time he did it, it's like, you're not making White squirm. There's nothing here.
White was
What's
very bored.
unfortunately happening?
White was very bored.
Yeah. Yep. This was crap. I need to be careful. I've reached out to Mahler before to see if I could get him on, but that might
You
not
just
happen.
burned that bridge, buddy.
Hey,
I know.
mean,
Damn it.
I'm probably still gonna. I'm still gonna listen to Stone Choir.
So what I tried to get him on here for actually wasn't race per se. He had made in the, is it Samuel Say? What was the debate he did before tonight? Is it SEY was his name? I can't remember. Well, I'm not going to look it up. I think it was Samuel Say. Anyway, he had, I'm sorry. No, it was the debate he did with Adam Green. And he did that on the iHip channel. And he did a debate on there. And he was talking about how if God is true, it really entails relationships and realities within all people at any given time. And so what does that mean? If God is true, then what does that mean for, I'm doing a really bad way of explaining it, but what does that mean for God in relationship to man? What does it mean in relationship to those developed pantheons? And I think this is a, I mean, if you've seen the stream I did with El Templar, it's like this sort of pagan Christianity, which is a terrible way. I find that super interesting, man. Like this God sends religion, not because religion is bad, not transcends it in a new age sense. If we grant religion being a creation of man, but then we grant there is God who established the actions, and then that religion can't be the distinction I'm making. That sort of pagan Christianity, natural extent interacting with mankind. Boy, that's a fascinating idea to me. Hoping to get him on here to talk about that. But yeah, I think Todd might be right. I might have burnt that bridge tonight. Bad, man. It was just bad. I don't know how to.
I think James White summed it up at the second rebuttal. The debate's already over. There was nothing to rebut. It's sad, but it was true.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's to the point, I think we've been going about an hour. We'll be here in a minute because I think the topics that I thought we might be touching on tonight, it was ethnicity proper, whether it was ethnicity proper, kinism, dealing with segregated or potentially segregated communities, dealing with Christianity in the midst of all of those issues, I think are big enough that we could probably have our own time. And frankly, nothing that decent segue into greater conversation on those issues, because all of us were sort of scratching our head wondering what just happened.
No, I learned something, Wandering Panda.
Anyways,
I learned one thing. I learned that men can't fly.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah, whatever. Scheiße, Untermenschen. It's just stupid. All right, well,
It happens.
what a bummer. All right, so Todd, if you want to start us off, let's do some shilling and let's call it a night, gentlemen. Stream earlier today discussing some ideas if you want to dig into that for a second. Oh, actually, give me just a second. Guys, in the pre-show, Praise of Folly and I were talking, and he's got, see if I can get up here real quick. He actually touched on subjects. You said about 5 years ago, is that correct?
Yeah, about 5 years ago.
Didn't know anything about that. So let's see if we can get that stream up here. Now, how do I? Oh, doggone it! How do I get that moved over to the spotlight area? Okay, there we go. I think we're good. Let's see. More than reactionary. All right. So what'd you do on there, Todd?
Yeah, just this is in part due to the fact that I had actually been in contact with a lot of Kinnis, and I became familiar with their work. While I didn't necessarily come to all the same conclusions they did, there are certain elements of the both Old and New Testaments, but New Testament specifically because we are Christians and not Jews, that don't really fit into the post-war consensus. That doesn't necessarily mean that you see part of what muddies the water here is you either have to be post-war consensus or Confederate Southern slavery segregation. And I was like, well, those aren't really the only two choices. And I go in and I look at the New Testament, meaning of words like ethnos, usages, and then discrete examples, such as Paul saying that I would be accursed for the kinsmen of the flesh, Titus, the Cretans, and Jesus calling the Canaanite woman a dog, and other verses. And it's like, okay, well, what would a consistent perspective look like on race from a Christian perspective? And I think it sort of threads the needle, right? It's there, so we're not going to pretend it's not. But I don't think it leads towards, say, Southern segregation.
Oh, did we lose you?
No, I was done. Sorry.
Oh, okay, perfect. Well, yeah. So go and check that one out, and then if you want to go really deep, Praise Folly's latest stream that he did to Florian. It was digging. Describe that. I would describe the personality of matter. Maybe is that a fair description?
Well, the TLDR is how information theory undermines the theory of evolution. That was the topic.
Yeah. Good. Very good. All right.
Well, you have it right up there. You can find me on the Praise of Folly podcast. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday, and then every other Saturday. Tuesday is just kind of general show, whatever I feel like. Thursday is right now Florian and I discussing science and faith, and then every other Saturday, this Saturday being a show, is the Roundtable, which I do with Keith and Florian, and we discuss current events usually, or politics, or something like that.
Yeah, it's very worthwhile. He's gonna make you scratch your head. Actually, put some time and effort into your thoughts and onto any sort of foundations that you have to those thoughts. So, for sure, Tex, what have you been up to? Find you and what do you get up to?
Yeah, man. You can find me on Twitter, Tex the Wig. Currently, Tex Von Harrison. I am stuck as the Black Brunswick. So yeah, follow me. See me get shot down by e-girls and
what is the inverse of a thirst trap? No, that makes it sound like you're ugly. It's not you or you're posting. So, all right, and then I believe probably from now, have we settled on a date, Tex? I think we're gonna through Horatio Hornblower. Does that sound right?
yes, we have not set up a date yet, but yeah, we'll be on that soon.
Yep. So we're gonna start streaming through what sort of entertainment ideas, what sort of reactionary right wing ideas, and what sort of just general manly masculine. As we were watching Horatio Hornblower, which is, did you find it? I think you found it on Prime, yeah?
Yes, I did. It's free for
So
me.
if you
at
guys want to
least.
be up to date on that, yeah. So you can find it on Prime. I'm not sure if you can else. Maybe PBS has a channel, but go ahead and jump into the. I think we're going to be doing that here in about 2 or 3 weeks. Posting on that, make sure that's getting updated. Panda, you can find me on X at next week. I am going to have, how do I want to describe this? Let's say a businessman, a forces operator. He is all three of those things. He will be on here discussing some of his business endeavors and what it is that he's accomplishing with post-military, and trying to keep him safe and trying to build in this here world. It's Thursday, and who knows what will happen. A lot of times I will post during the week. It just happens as it happens. So it's me. Gentlemen, anything else? Because
Good night.
Yeah. Good night, everybody.
and good luck. All right, guys, have